Hi, my name's Louise. I am the editor for the best-selling book, Drone Professional 1. This came out earlier this year, and it comprises current thinking on drone technology, the drone industry, best practice, as written by 16 professional experts. I have one of those experts with me today from Italy, Professor Filippo Tomasello from EuroUSC-Italia. Hello, Filippo.
Hi, Louise. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I saw you hold the copy of your book there. That was brilliant.
I am very proud to have been partner for this undertaking with the other colleagues and you.
Thank you. It was great you were involved. I was really chuffed. But I think if you can just say what is your background? How are you involved in the drone industry?
I started my career in aviation in 1969, and believe it or not, jetliners were already flying at the time, but I started from the military side. So I have served 15 years in the Italian Air Force as flight test engineer on new prototypes, like the Tornado, for instance, was one of my major projects at the time. And then in 1984, I left the Air Force and I joined the civilian Italian air traffic control, the equivalent of ATNS in South Africa. There I spent 15 more years of my career. And in 2000, I decided to leave Italy and I joined Eurocontrol in Brussels, and then the European Commission still in Brussels, and then EASA in Cologne. Across these three European organizations, I spent 15 more years, and it ended up in 2015 that the EASA management was planning to terminate my contract with the excuse that I was too old to continue working, only because I was approaching the age of 65. And so I had to leave EASA for age limits. This was the regulation. I mean, it was nothing against me, but of course I felt quite frustrated and insulted. And so I decided to establish my company, EuroUSC-Italia, which is still alive. It's a micro enterprise, but we are working on it. Okay,
no, that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, unfortunate about the age thingy there. But I'm interested. I mean, what particularly attracted you about unmanned aviation? Because they're similar but different, hey?
Yes, well, sometimes you see our lives are not planned too much in advance, but when I turned the age of 60, I realized that the age of retirement was approaching, and I translated this into risk of unemployment. So I said, what will I do next? And I looked around throughout all aviation domains, and almost everywhere, the market was stable, saturated, and full of excellent experts. On the contrary, drones civil drones were at beginning. They were ignored by the majority of traditional aviators. So the field was open, but I saw the prospect for a progressive growth, even exponential growth at a certain point in time. And so I had the chance of being the focal point in EASA for unmanned aircraft for 5 or 6 years, just before retirement. And during this period, I decided that my professional future would have been in this segment of aviation, not flying drones, but working on regulation of the drones. Because after 15 years in European regulatory agency, I have forgotten everything about technical design or actual flights. But I had some experience in regulation. And of course, any commercial operator has to comply with certain regulation. And so we have developed our small company in the middle between industry and regulators to support operators to have rules better adapted to their needs. And once the rules are published, supporting the operators to comply and obtain approvals, which is what they need for their business. So,
yes. Okay. I mean, I was saying to you earlier before we hit the record button, it is interesting. Regulation seems to be something that people love and hate at the same time. I mean, you know, the whole thing is for safety, but regulations do seem to bring out some interesting passions from both sides of the argument.
Regulation is translated into legal norms, which is perceived by the majority of aviators as a burden, as a topic which is arid. And this is not even helped by the majority of aviation inspectors, which normally come with a long protocol of questions, and they just tick the boxes.
Yes.
And yes, it's boring, cumbersome, costly, difficult, I agree. However, if you look from a certain long-term historical perspective, you may see that there is a certain philosophy and culture and approach behind the regulation, which has changed along the decades. For instance, if you look the Chicago Convention, which was written in 1944, we have Article 31, which says the aircraft needs an airworthiness certificate, and Article 32, the pilot needs a license. Full stop. There is only the machine and the man or woman flying the machine. Like a cowboy and his horse lonely in the prairies, nothing around.
Okay.
Today we know that instead we have organizations behind. The aerodrome operator, air traffic control, the UAS operator. And so we shifted more and more, putting emphasis on organizations. You don't see written this into any regulation. This is behind. But if you understand what is behind, you can better adapt, but you can also better forecast what may happen next. And in the UAS sector, the regulation is not yet consolidated. So it's quite important for companies wishing to have a strategic view to figure out where the future generation of regulations in 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years from now may go.
Okay. Yes. But I liked how you covered in your chapter the sort of, you referred to the risk-based regulation. You sort of discussed the sort of movement from performance-based towards risk-based. Is that right? That's the sort of...
Yes, because as I said, in the history of aviation, I see 3 trends for regulation. One is looking at the organization, which we realized that were important after the crash, the collision on the runway of Tenerife in 1977.
Yes.
Then there is another thing which is happening in the society, and we saw every day. Technology progresses at an accelerated pace. Regulators cannot follow this. And so
yes,
most regulators, including FAA in the States and EASA in Europe, speak about performance-based regulation. So technical standards are no longer essentially compiled by the authorities, but are compiled by industry through standard developing organizations like ISO, ASTM, EuroCAE, RTCA, and others. The third trend is indeed towards risk-based regulation. What means risk-based regulation. It's a response because we have troubles in regulating aviation all over the world because of mosquitoes, believe it or not. A few months ago, the World Health Organization published some statistics about the number of yearly fatalities caused by mosquitoes through dengue, malaria, or other diseases for which mosquitoes are the vehicle. According to their official statistics, every year in the world, we have around 700,000 victims because of mosquitoes. If now we go to aviation and you look the statistics on commercial aviation, since 2000 per year, we had less than 1,000 people dying in aviation catastrophes. So 1,000 compared to 700,000. So governments and public opinions believe that civil aviation is sufficiently safe. So no government is increasing the resources for their respective authorities. Now, with the drones, we have newcomers in aviation, 100 more operators than we had in traditional aviation. So authorities cannot cope with this huge demand using traditional methods of oversight. We cannot go to the inspectors to cover everything. And this was a challenge for any authority. In Europe, between 2010 and 2015, then we made a steering towards what is today risk-based regulation, which means we have to cover from the kite of a child to the unmanned version of an Airbus or a Boeing jetliner carrying freight internationally. There is a huge variety of solutions, but we cannot expect the child to knock at the door of the CAA to ask for a lot of approvals. The problem is, where do we put the bar? And so our political master decided we have to put some thresholds, which depends on societal sensitivity. So this is a political decision. It's not a mathematical equation or a technical decision. It's a policy decision. And so some drones should be largely unregulated, if you want, so buy and fly, no administrative procedures. Are they risky for society? Yes, potentially yes. But the balance between the probability of a fatality and the burden on operator is such which we can be liberal. In the book, I gave the example of a long knife to cut parma ham in my kitchen.
Yes, you did, yes.
I can buy freely this knife, but I guess even in South Africa and wherever you go in a department store and you can buy a knife long 30 or 40 centimeters because you want to cut salami or ham. This is legal. But with that object, we also know that sometimes that object has been used to kill or to attempt to kill other people. But society believes that the probability of such event occurring is so low that we do not burden millions of people or butchers which want just to cut salami. And so these knives are freely in commerce. And this is what is the open category. Since there is no administrative procedure beyond registration, this means that there is no workload on the authorities. And the authorities can then concentrate on which is more relevant for society. And so we have in Europe 3 risk-based categories. One is the open, which I just told you. The other one is certified, a drone of 20 tons flying from South Africa to Nigeria and carrying freight, for which we apply the traditional approach to aviation approvals and certification. Then in the middle, there are a lot of possible operations which are more risky than the kite of a child, still essentially at very low level, but going beyond visual line of sight, including, for instance, to carry small parcels over urban areas.
Yep.
But a drone of 15, 20 kilos will never kill hundreds of people. So there we decided in Europe that we will have a light touch. So not a plethora of certificates like in traditional aviation, but just one authorization issued to the operator based on a risk assessment compiled or at least presented by the operator. So this is the risk-based approach, protecting society without overloading too much with bureaucracy, not only the operators, but even the authorities whose resources are limited.
Okay, no, I like that. I'm not sure everybody has quite got that same sort of process, but I like that idea of the risk-based. I had a question for you, and I've just temporarily lost it, but I'll come back to that. But you know, it is quite interesting. Do you see a situation where there could be an authority that looks after unmanned aviation in its own, or do you still see it would be a realm for manned and unmanned to be operated by the same authority? Do you see a future maybe with an unmanned CAA, so to speak?
I don't see yet this trend clearly emerging.
Okay.
But already today, drone operations are subject to several authorities.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
civil aviation authorities normally look at safety. And as I said, for the moment, I see no signs that the role will be stolen by others. But in addition, drones may also have security implications, for which armed forces or Ministry of Interior are usually responsible. And so these authorities will become more and more involved because a drone, like anything else, may even be used beyond the law or even for malicious purposes. And then, as we all know, at least today, the vast majority of commercial drones capture information, any sort of information. And this information may infringe the privacy of citizens. So at least in Europe, there is a huge debate between privacy and use or exploitation of drones. And in Europe, we have a specific regulation on data protection and privacy, which mandates European states to establish an authority for privacy. So even this authority is involved. Finally, the most promising segment of the market for drones seems to be urban air mobility, which means overflying metropolitan areas at altitudes of less than 500 or 1,000 feet. So flight just above the roofs of our buildings. Planning the vertiports where to land, the emergency landing site, the corridors along which these drones may fly, impacts on the prerogatives of the municipal authorities, which are normally responsible to govern the territory. And so also these authorities will be involved. The challenge is to provide operators with apps on the mobile telephone, on the PC or tablet, where through a single entry point, they can interact with all the authorities. And then once they receive the okay, this means that it's okay for all the involved authorities. Because otherwise, if they have to knock physically at the doors of several authorities, they will no longer fly. But maybe this crisis of the COVID helps even authorities to become digital. And in fact, the UAS traffic management is largely based on these ideas. There will be one or more app on the mobile telephone, and the remote pilot can do applications and request approvals, plan the flights, basically through one digital interface.
I think that's a very valid point. I was chatting to James Ellis about this, one of the other authors, and you seem to have an analog system and the digital system, and they're just not quite coming together. And just from my experience here, everything's submitted in paper, and yet you're dealing with a drone, which is a product of the digital technology. And it's, the manufacturers are trying to find ways to geo-fence and stop people doing what they shouldn't be doing. And we've got all this sort of digital one side, but we're still trying to communicate with another side, like the civil aviation or the authorities, with an analog, a non-digital way. So I like the idea that perhaps this will become more streamlined through digital processes.
Of course, I mean, the various ICAO contracting states will progress at their own speed. In US, since 4 years, we have already electronic registration of the drone with the FAA. In Italy, we have this since few months. Okay. In Poland, there is already an application which authorizes VLOS operation in certain bubbles of airspace, subject to clearance by the Air Traffic Control Center in Warsaw. In Ireland, they have another application where the pilot can plan a flight even close to an airport, providing that the altitude is below the obstacle limitation surfaces. So there is not yet complete maturity, neither complete standardization or implementation, but that's the direction in which the community is going.
Okay. I mean, another sort of off-the-cuff question, just listening to what you say, do you see like a separate airspace entirely for unmanned, or do you think that's too soon?
This is my next publication.
Oh, okay. All right.
But I can give you some anticipations, because they start in the United States speaking about UTM, which stands for UAS traffic management. And immediately Europe starting screaming and said, no, we have one airspace. Even at very low level, we may have manned traffic, not only ultralight for recreational purposes, but even helicopters in medical or emergency services or firefighting or other public interest missions. So since the airspace is unique, we can not only manage UAS in the airspace, the same set of services and the same procedures should be applicable even to manned aircraft. So in Europe, we will not implement UTM. We will implement U-space. And then there I have a problem, because once they say U-space, what the U as uniform stands for? If it is unmanned or UAS, we are back to square one.
Okay.
In this moment, I tend to say that both the terms UTM or U-space are not the optimal ones. And I am proposing to the International Standard Organization to define the term LTM, low-level traffic management.
Okay.
And if I convince ISO first and the world after, then from the term LTM, it will be evident that the system serves both manned and unmanned aircraft into the same volume of airspace.
Okay. Well, excellent. All right. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. Yes. Okay. Cool. What do you think is coming out of the COVID crisis in terms of the drone industry? I mean, we have seen, yesterday, the British government is allowing the police, they're relaxing the regulations to allow the police to monitor people and their social distancing. You said earlier about the public and their perception and data privacy.
Yes.
I'm curious how this unfolds.
Yes. There is a no-man land between state flights and civil flights, because Article 3 of the Chicago Convention mentioned state aircraft, not even flight, but it was written with military fighters in mind, which clearly only fight for state purposes. But once we translate which are state flights and which are civil flights in the various legislation, there is no harmonization among the ICAO contracting states. In Italy, for instance, the national police is eligible to conduct state flights and then is exempted from any civil aviation regulation. But we have also municipal police, local police, which are considered civil flights.
Okay.
By Italy. In other countries, it may be different. But in several countries, it's like that. Not every public entity is eligible to conduct state flights. And so they are subject to civil aviation rules and procedures. In this case, since we are still at the beginning of the development of UAS, the procedures may be cumbersome. And once you have an emergency, of course, you don't have time to wait 1 month, not even 7 days for an authorization. That's why in Italy and several other countries, the procedures to authorize flights have been waived for local police, firefighters, Red Cross, and other emergency response organizations. So the rules in terms of distance from aerodrome, competency of the pilot, maximum height remains, but the administrative procedures are waived during the crisis. Okay. The good side of this is that population is seeing that drones can be useful to solve their problems, or at least to contribute to the solution of their problems. And so the confidence by the public opinion on the drones is increasing. But then these drones are mainly used to collect information on whether they are assemblies of people or too much traffic in certain areas. And again, there we go very close to the border of infringing privacy.
Exactly.
Where is the threshold between protecting the society and protecting the privacy of the individual? Again, it's a political matter. And it's not only linked to drones. You know that we can be traced through our respective mobile telephones. And a lot of information on what we do on internet can be tracked and stored by someone, and we all are profiled, and we received targeted commercials in our mails. But this is a debate which will increase, because indeed public authorities may use the drones to observe society, to enforce law, and there we need a political decision to balance between privacy and protection, which will depend very much on the cultural climate in different societies.
No, I agree. I think there's a fine line, and I would hate, I love the idea that this time is perhaps going to gain confidence in the value of drones from the public perspective, but there is a fine line at which maybe it becomes, well, these are just spying on us, which a lot of people think is happening anyway with a drone. You know, like, oh, somebody's using a drone to spy on me in my garden. So I think there are some interesting questions that are going to come out of this. And I hope there's an opportunity that someone does some form of research to sort of say, well, how have drones benefited? What can they do the next time? And what can we do to facilitate it?
For this, we need historians of law or philosophers. But I think that there, the society, not aviation, society has a problem. Because in aviation, Now we say that reactive safety, so investigating after the catastrophe, is not sufficient. We need proactive safety or predictive safety. So we need to anticipate what may happen and mitigate the causal factors before the catastrophe happens. But now, if you look at criminal law, in the totality of countries, follows the Hammurabi tradition of almost 5,000 years ago. There is a punishment after you have committed a crime. Before, there is nothing. So this is a reactive protection of society. First, I kill my wife, and then I am put in jail. But the law is not sufficient to monitor me and to prevent and to act proactively. So we have a huge historical problem, which, I mean, we aviators cannot solve, because if you look at what we apprehend from the media about murders, often these people had psychological diseases, had family difficulties, and a difficult social integration. So there were symptoms that these people were more dangerous than others, potentially. And what we have done? Nothing to protect their privacy until someone takes a truck and drives on the Nice seafront and kills 20 people. And they say, now we put you in jail for life. Yes, but 20 people have been killed. So I don't know the solution, but I humbly believe that we have a problem.
I think so, because I'm interested, you know, you sort of say there about proactive, perhaps using drones to try and monitor people's temperatures. Now, is that being proactive? But that worries me. But what do you do with somebody after you've picked up their temperature? It's not been proven, I think, that the temperature is one of the key indicators, because you could be having a bad day or you might be sick with something else. And that might be trying to be proactive. But what do you do with that person once their temperature has been identified as being abnormal? And I'm curious what the next step is after the pilot or the authorities have regulated that.
Of course, vendors of technology want to sell what they have, and they propose a lot of ideas. But at least in this moment in Italy, drones are used mainly to spot if in an area there is too much car traffic in respect of the current limitations, or whether there are a group of people which are too numerous and too close as they could be. Okay. So I don't think that measuring the temperature of people to the drones will go very far. I may be wrong, but we may not need to go that far. What we could do is to have a sort of biological screening of us, and this information turn up on the mobile telephone. But again, where is the limit between societal protection and privacy?
Absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, I have no idea really if that is a sensible way, you know, of remote temperature monitoring. But I know people are talking about it. But yeah, I agree. At what point does it become unacceptable? That is an invasion of privacy and or even a sort of like a patient-doctor confidentiality. Yes. It's kind of an interesting situation. But has there been acceptance in Italy for the use of drones to monitor people and whether they are keeping social distancing? Has that been accepted, or is there reports of otherwise?
Not monitoring individuals and identifying them through the drone, but monitoring if in the towns there are squares, streets or parks or roads where there is a group of people. In which case, the police, having identified that somewhere there is a group of people, will send a car, a patrol there, to identify those people, inquiry, and do what they have to do. So I said, we do not use the drone to identify people or cars, but just to identify the density of activity in a given area.
Okay. But that's been generally accepted. Nobody's worried about that too much.
And of course,
Okay.
we are also thinking about using drones to transport biological samples, because laboratory analysis are becoming more and more sophisticated and more costly. So not every hospital can be equipped to carry out all possible tests, which means that biological samples already today are being transported during the day from one hospital to another hospital. But doing this by car, of course, is costly, cumbersome, subject to traffic jams, increases pollution in the environment. So it may not be the best solution. So we are thinking, several hospitals are thinking about using drones to transport blood or other biological samples from the place where this sample has been taken to an hospital within a range of 15 or 20 or 30 kilometers.
Okay.
BVLOS operation. For this, in Europe, we have a regulatory challenge, because these operations, if there is the risk that this sample, in case of crash, would spill around, is considered a dangerous good, because that sample may be contaminated, may infect someone else. So it's considered dangerous good. So if, in case of crash of the drone, the sample would spill out, this operation goes into the certified category. Type certificate for the design of the drone, airworthiness certificate for the drone, pilot license, maintenance organization approval, a bunch of regulatory approval, which would kill economically the operation. However, our current regulation says that the drone enters, the operation enters the certified category if there is a risk connected to the transport of dangerous goods. So one possible interpretation, if the container is crash proof, so the drone crashes, but the sample is not dispersed in the environment, then the operation could remain in the specific category and approval would be much easier and less costly.
Okay. That sounds, yeah, there's a bit of flexibility there depending on the design.
Depending on the design. And that's one of the things that I am trying to propose to ISO, to standardize what we mean by crash-proof containers for toxic medicines or biological, because yes, everyone understands the concept, but exactly how do we test? How many G's we want to test that it does not spill out?
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Hey? Oh, wow. Okay. Is there anything else that you find that this current situation is having an influence on the drone industry or the way it may go?
Well, I see that at least in Italy, the market is splitting, because on one side we have a crowd of recreational users of the drones, but we have also a bunch of companies which are growing and becoming more and more professional and more able to carry out complex operations. For few of these companies, this crisis was an opportunity, because several municipal police do not own or operate drones. Of course, they could buy one, train the pilot, define the manuals, but even this will take time. Now, in the Chicago Convention, our ancestors spoke about state aircraft. In Europe, in the Union, in the basic EASA regulation, we are more advanced because we speak about state flights, not state aircraft, which means that if the local police contract a commercial operator to use a drone for the purposes of the police, that flight comes under the regulation applicable to the police. And so they are flying in support of the police, but this already happened several times. As you may know, in Italy, unfortunately, we have frequent earthquakes. When there is an earthquake, the fire brigades, the civil protection and other response team needs to make surveys of the areas. They may not have a large number of directly owned and operated drones in their hands, but they usually contract civil operators. Okay. And while journalists and commercial operators are normally prevented to enter the emergency response area, because this again may infringe the privacy. You may have dead bodies on the street and journalists may want to sell these images, so they are prevented. But companies which are contracted by the emergency response commander can fly because they fly for public interest. And so this is another segment of the market which in Europe is increasing, because our regulation is a bit more modern than the Chicago Convention.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I think some other countries aren't quite like that. You know, I've seen frustration coming out on LinkedIn, for example, about the regulations not being flexible or movable enough to enable their use under these emergency situations. So yeah, that's good to hear.
Sometimes,
Filippo, sorry, carry on.
Sometimes, if you are a pioneer, then after a few years, your regulation may be the most old-fashioned. Yeah. And I humbly believe that in South Africa, Part 101 is like that. When it was published, it was one of the most advanced in the world. But now that we are going towards risk-based and performance-based regulation, it may need some modernization. But that's obvious. I mean, once you are a pioneer, of course, you do your best with the state of the art of the time.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm not going to say anything because I can stand on the soapbox for quite a while. but you are absolutely right. I mean, you can be a pioneer and then everybody takes off ahead of you, and you just need to sit back and sort of revise to catch up. And I think that's what we do need. But yeah, you know, there are other countries. I mean, Kenya's only just allowed commercial drone use. So I mean, at least we have the ability to have commercial use here. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think regulations tends to, as I said, get everybody going. How can someone reach out to you if they want to find out more about what you do, or have some comments and what EuroUSC-Italia, if they can help them?
Yes, you have my mail address, which is filippo.tomasello@EuroUSC-Italia.it. So anyone may trace me, or you may even Google the name of my company or the name or my name, and you find some contacts through LinkedIn or whatever. So today is not a problem to trace.
Great. Okay, I'll definitely put those links in with the post so that everybody can get hold of you if they would like to find out more and just talk to you more on this subject. But thank you very much for joining me today. I think that was a really interesting comment. I mean, as I said, the regulations really have lots of things to cover, and I think people can get frustrated by them. And it's really useful to understand where they're coming from and where they may be going to. So thank you very much. I think just to wrap up, I just want to thank everybody for watching. And Drone Professional 1 is available on Kindle and paperback format. There's Filippo showing the book there. So yeah, I'll put the links underneath for the book and for getting hold of Filippo. And thank you very much for watching, and please keep well and keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Bye.
Bye-bye.